Aloha, everybody. This is Megs on another episode of Epic Podcast. I'm here today with Donovan, Lauren, and Dallas, and we're talking about Saint Damien, the patron saint of Hawaii. You guys are not excited?
No, it's great. This is one of my favorite people ever.
I warned you, Dallas, that I'm weird, and you said I'm weirder. You're weirder.
There's a really good chance I'm weirder.
Okay, well, step it up.
Well, it's a podcast about Saint Damien, though, so I don't know if we're going to compare that right now.
Okay, fine. Gosh.
We'll try our best to keep you together.
Putting me in my spot. Now I have to act all strict, Mr. Principal. Fun fact, Dallas is a principal, so now I have to... Should I call you Mr.?
No, it's fine. You just call me Dallas. Please don't.
We'll settle this. I'm weirder than both of you.
Let's go. Okay, this is actually a great lead into Saint Damien, because Saint Damien, patron saint of Hawaii, we're talking about leprosy here. We're talking about isolation, rejection today on this podcast, and how all of those things tie into Saint Damien and what he did for the human race, okay? So thank you for saying that, Donovan. I don't think you're weird. We're all weird, right?
Everybody's weird in their own ways.
If we weren't all crazy, we'd all go insane.
All right, Saint Damien.
Yeah, so about Saint Damien.
Yeah.
Take it away, Dallas. Fun fact about Saint Damien.
Well, Saint Damien is from Belgium, and he was born in 1840. Came to Hawaii around 1863, 1864. And interesting fact, he actually finished his studies here, right down the road from where we're right now.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Right where St. Anne Church is, it was the parish of Ahuimanu. And he studied under Father Arsenius Walsh, who helped finish his studies. Mm-hmm. And then he was ordained as a priest at our cathedral basilica in town. And so he is a saint that was ordained here in Hawaii. That's pretty amazing. That's
that is
interesting
very cool.
fact. And then he went on to serve in various capacities in the Hawaiian Islands. Part of the Sacred Hearts congregation, by the way.
Yeah.
The Order of the Sacred Hearts, which is still around and still has a very heavy presence here in Hawaii, and who has a very heavy influence or engagement with Epic. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we are in a building that is owned by the Sacred Hearts Order right now. And so a very important order is specifically in Polynesia, in the Pacific Islands. And so he did various different things after he was ordained and did some mission work out on the Big Island and other places. And in fact, he had some involvement with my own ancestors that were in the Big Island at that time. Yeah. I believe he buried a few of my ancestors, which is amazing that he was a part of that. And then 1873, around there, he went to Molokai and began to serve those who suffered with leprosy or Hansen's disease. And it's really interesting because when he first went there, he was very much, I wouldn't say the words afraid, but like most people at that time who did not understand that disease, mm-hmm. his journal he's very put off by it.
Oh, wow.
And he struggles with it. But I think that the lesson that I learned from him by reading his journals and following his life after that initial thing was he engaged and embraced and embodied a Catholic principle that I think we should all strive to embrace, and that is true solidarity. Mm-hmm. Because true solidarity, according to many great Catholic philosophers, true solidarity is to become indistinguishable from those you serve. Mm-hmm. And that's what that great saint did. And he was not only a spiritual father to them, but did everything that he needed to do to take care of their corporal needs as well. Mm-hmm. Built churches, built hospitals, planted Hawaiian foods, very proudly learned the Hawaiian language so that he could speak to the natives here. And he gave his life in a very real way, having contracted leprosy sometime later. He eventually died in 1889, around there, but was beloved by the Hawaiian people. And in fact, Queen Liliuokalani, the last reigning monarch of the Hawaiian Islands, while she was princess and King Kalakaua, her brother, was still king, through her recommendation, he was knighted as part of the Kingdom of Hawaii. And he, embraced that, or he was very humble about it, but it was granted to him because he was a person who loved our people. And remember, the idea of skin color and racism and all of that is something very foreign to the Native people.
Mm-hmm.
If it exists now, I will say very boldly, it was introduced.
Yeah.
But the reality is he was one of us.
Yeah.
And we embraced him. And so I have a special fondness for him because not only did he speak the language that I'm able to speak as well, but he died for my people,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so I have a special love for him, and he's a big part of my family's life. And then eventually his body was exhumed after he was buried in Kalaupapa. It was exhumed around the 1930s, 1935. And then he was shipped back to Belgium, where he was from. And then we'll just fast forward in 2009, he was canonized as a saint by Pope Benedict XVI. And so he is one of 2 saints that served here in Hawaii, and he's the patron of Hawaii, the patron of Hawaiians, and then also the patron of those who suffer with Hansen's disease or leprosy. And the colony in which he served still stands. And because it is so isolated from not only the rest of Hawaii, but from the island of Molokai itself, it's a peninsula on the bottom of a cliff that separates it from the rest of that island. It is in many ways left untouched. And so when you go there, you can still see the church that he built. You can still see, priests can offer mass on the altar he built. He would smoke a tobacco pipe, but because he was so isolated, he didn't have access to tobacco. So he grew his own, and where his garden used to be, the tobacco is still growing.
Yeah.
Wildly. It's still there. I had a chance to go and search that out to prove that my theory was right, that it would still be wildly growing. And then many other things on that peninsula are reminiscent of the decades and century, over a century of the heartache of the people. But he was someone who embraced the outcast.
Yeah.
I'll just end with this. I know I'm taking a lot of time.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite stories that really inspires me to what I want to be as a layman, as a father of children, as a dad, is when they were in Kalawao. Now, so the peninsula of Kalaupapa, that's what it's normally referred to. There's Kalaupapa, but there's actually a whole other county which is referred to as Kalawao. It's very dark, very damp. There's not a lot of sunlight. Now, the ocean view and everything's beautiful, but it's cut off from everything else. Very hard to grow things there, very wet. And that's where he first landed. And that's where he built St. Philomena, which was his original church. And back in that day, people did not understand what leprosy was. They didn't understand how it was contracted or how it was not contracted. They didn't understand any of that. And so the people on the other Hawaiian islands, including the kingdom itself, who was very unaware, very afraid, they didn't know what to do, they would send people to Kalaupapa when they contracted this disease. But some of the ship captains were so afraid of getting close to Kalaupapa that when they would bring patients, they would go a certain amount away on a boat. The ship would come and they would push the people over. And the powerful story, while you stand on top by St. Philomena and you look down to aesthetically beautiful Kalawao Bay, you see these steep cliffs. The story goes that when the patients were pushed over, St. Damien, in his cassock, full cassock, would climb down that cliff and would swim out to try to rescue as many as he could. Not all of them would make it, but he did what he could.
Wow.
Because he loved his people. He loved the people who he considered to be a part of. He embraced them as his brothers and sisters. And so truly, in our modern society, I look up to him because we are so dang selfish. We think about ourselves. And to think of an example of someone like that, even in a modern way, if I can emulate that in even a small way, and be selfless and look out for the needs of others, I think that would do St. Damien a great honor. All right, I'm done.
Well, we can just end this episode. I have so many questions and things that I want to talk about now. We only have like 10 minutes now.
I'm sorry, that's my bad.
No, that was amazing.
Learned so much.
Yeah, I mean, so for the listeners, Dallas and Donovan, born and raised in Hawaii, you guys probably grew up hearing a lot about St. Damien. I would think, right, in school or just in the community?
Generally, yes, but I actually went to St. Francis schools, which I guess St. Francis is considered a rival to Damien Memorial, but I digress. But the funny thing is that one of the most revered saints that we always talked about at St. Francis was St. Damien's sort of like right hand, St. Marianne Cope, who basically, similar story, also went to Kalaupapa because she was inspired by the story of St. Damien and went to go help him. Even stories say that she also helped nurse St. Damien when he was dying.
It's true. That's a true story.
And then also, too, later on, I also learned about, not a saint yet, but Brother Dutton, who was basically a Civil War soldier in America at the time, who, after the Civil War, had basically fallen into a very hard life of like alcoholism and being divorced from his wife. And so, interesting enough, he eventually came back to the church and basically volunteered himself to go to Kalaupapa to help with the cause with the Catholic Church there. Even though he was never really like a religious person per se, he was actually a lay person his entire life.
I was just going to say, and the cause for his canonization is now open. And so there's, as Catholics, we can refer to him as servant of God, Joseph Dutton, Brother Joseph Dutton, because his cause is open. And I think that we're on our way, hopefully within the next couple of years, venerable and then blessed and then saint. So thank you for bringing that up. Very important.
I also have another interesting story about Kalaupapa as well. I mean, I've never actually been to Kalaupapa. I'm probably one of the few people at Epic who probably the only person who's never really been there yet. But I actually had an uncle, Uncle Michael, who actually used to fly supply missions up to Kalaupapa, who was really well liked by the people over there too as well.
I have a question for Lauren.
Oh,
okay.
So
take it away, Dallas. You want my
I
job?
know.
You want to just take it?
I know. Just because I'm interested, as you had mentioned, or kind of implied in your question, which is a good one, that when you grow up here, especially as a Catholic, you learn a lot about St. Damien. When did you learn about St. Damien as someone who is not from here, right? When did you learn about him and how do you view him? What role does he have in your mind, in your life as a Catholic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say I went to a Catholic school. I went to a Catholic K through 8 growing up in Florida. And so I had heard of St. Damien, but I had never been to Hawaii at that point. I had never been to Hawaii until I moved here. So I really did not know up until very recently any details about him or the ties to Hawaii. It wasn't really until moving here and being involved with Epic, learning more of the details of him and his life. And I think one of the biggest things that stuck out for me was, like you were talking about the selflessness, but the selflessness and love for everyone, Catholic and non-Catholic, someone like you or someone not like you, and the outcasts, and how everybody, Catholic, non-Catholic, political, non-political, everybody's going to have different views, and you can agree and disagree, but you're going to love them no matter what.
I mean, Christ in Matthew chapter 25, I believe, or 26, it's one of those, I promise, when he talks about the corporal works of mercy, he doesn't say feed the hungry if they're Catholic.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that. He says feed the hungry, right? We're called to love people, not just love people if they have a particular label, right? Now, I say label, and I mean that a little too lightly. I mean, it is important. However, we love everyone, and that's Christ's love, to embrace everyone. An interesting fact about Kalaupapa that I'm sure the listeners who are not from here would be interested to know is that there are still patients that live in Kalaupapa, people who still suffer from that disease that still live there. Now, the way it worked was, I believe it was in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, the mandatory isolation of those with that disease was lifted because there was a cure. Or a cure to stop it. It doesn't, undo what happened to your body, but it stops it. It's spread. And so it was no longer mandatory to be there. However, there was a period of maybe a decade or so, if I'm correct, where if you did have it, you still had the option of going there because they basically at that point had the best care in the world for that disease. And so there are, I believe, 8 or 9 patients left who are I think the youngest is probably 90 or just right below 90, who had that disease, who took that option to go and now have a residence stay. They can travel back and forth. We know one very well that's a close friend at Epic who has a house in Wahiwa on this island, but also has a beautiful home in Kalaupapa as well. And so that's something interesting that people don't know, that the legacy of Damien and Saint Marianne and a servant of God, Joseph Dutton, it's still very much within, I'm not going to say living memory because there's no one alive that remembers them, but it's still within, it's not that long ago because there are still patients that are there that were still, still taking a part of what they established.
Yeah, it's all just so cool. And you asked Lauren, when did she learn about it? But do you remember? So his feast day, if I'm not mistaken, is in May, correct? But a few months ago, you and I, Lauren, were at Mass, and the homily was all about St. Damien. Do you know why that would have been? I can't think of it now.
Because St. Damien's awesome.
Well, yeah, but was the priest going to Molokai or something? I'm just now remembering this now, but
or coming back from maybe.
Yeah, and so maybe he was.
Or maybe the gospel was something about corporal work, selflessness, solidarity, something like that. Yeah.
I don't remember what it was, but that was
Father Harris.
So
it might have been that he had just come from, because I think he had taken a trip.
Okay,
there, but...
and that was the first time I had, and that was this year that I have learned anything about St. Damien, and it's just really cool to know. That's why I had you lead it, because I would do just a disservice reading his biography from some random article online. You live in Hawaii, you grew up learning about him and walking the streets that he potentially walked on. It's just so cool. But I think it's very interesting, and not that we have much in common, but the fact that St. Damien was born and raised a foreigner, to Hawaii. He's born in Belgium. Lauren and I are not like you and Donovan. We are not from here. So I see a lot of similarity in that sense where we, he didn't necessarily have the choice to come here. From my understanding is he joined the priesthood because he wanted to serve God. He didn't necessarily know that he was coming to Hawaii or what he would be doing. Lauren and I's line of work, we got told to come to Hawaii. Hawaii is a fantastic place. We are not mad.
No.
I'm sure he wasn't mad, but I'm sure there were points where he questioned a lot of, especially when he's getting leprosy himself, like, what the heck am I doing here? God, why did you send me here? But a lot of his story is about isolation.
Oh, yeah.
And we can feel that when we move to a place like Hawaii, where this is literally an island. We are so far away from our family and friends. We are isolated. No. So I found like this comfort in learning about him of, to someone I've never prayed to. I find myself now being like, wow, that was, pretty similar. But I bring that up because one of the ways that Lauren and I don't want to speak for you, Lauren, but specifically tied to Epic and small group and community, that's how we fight that isolation. And I want to kind of talk about how we can talk to the listeners about getting over that hump of feeling isolated by getting involved in community.
That's really, I mean, that's a really, really good thing. I think that that's essential not only for those who are not from here. It's important for all of us because it is very easy in our day and age to just isolate yourself. It's very easy to do that.
Yeah.
And so fellowship and community is where it's at, and that's really, really important. Saint Damien. I'm going on a tangent, I know, but I think the producers of this show know that if you're going to get me on here, it's not going to be a 15-minute show. It's just not happening. But Saint Damien, he would actually come back to Oahu regularly to get supplies and also to go to confession because he was the only priest there. And there was a story of one time he came back to Oahu, and the authorities at that time, Catholic authorities, to be fair, said, if you go back to Kalaupapa, you cannot come back here again. And he was given the ultimatum of either go back to Kalaupapa and stay there, or you don't have to go back again. And that saintly man who loved his people got back in the ship and went to Kalaupapa. And then it was a few months later, he wanted to go to confession. And the story goes that the ship, who was dropping more patients off but had a chaplain on board, would not get off the boat. And so he swam out and yelled his confession up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Talk about isolation.
Yeah.
Right? And talk about, someone we can look to during those times where we feel, isolated. But community is important. Not only community in faith, but just community in general. Having friends to have dinner with.
Yeah.
Laugh with. Just have fun with. Right? Very important. And it's something that Damien sacrificed. And in fact, he sacrificed it, but did he really? Because I think that what he ended up being in the shadows of Kalawao is he created a community for them.
Yes.
He became community for them. And the stories go that he created a community where even when they were suffering, they still laughed. Even when they were still isolated and forsaken, he brought joy.
Dallas, you just mentioned joy, and I think it's funny because in my preparation for this, I was reading up on him, and one of the things, I think it was from his journal, said that he referred to his missionary or himself as the happiest missionary in the world. And so I want to talk a little bit about the Eucharist briefly. We're going to get into this next week a little bit more, but so he wrote, "It is at the foot of the altar that we find the strength we need in our isolation. And it is there that he found himself, and for those he served, the support and encouragement in the consolidation and hope that made him the happiest missionary in the world." So again, it's just so crazy that this man was so strong in such an isolating time in his whole life. But yet he found the joy because of God. And it's just so empowering and so just powerful. When I was learning about it, it's like, okay, how does this relate to modern day now? I mean, we still talk about him so much. Leprosy is not just, it's not something that we are talking about day in and day out. So how is St. Damien so relevant to us now? But we already talked about it at the beginning. Racism didn't exist in his world. He didn't do it. He loved everybody. Rejection, all of the people that were coming to him had been rejected, but he loved them anyway.
Yeah. Father of outcasts. Yeah.
It's just wild. And I think all of us here today, and then all of us listening, we have felt rejected or like we've been an outcast in some degree. Yeah. We've all felt isolated to some degree. It's just, again, he's never been a saint in my lifetime that I have thought to ever prayed to or sought to or been devoted to. And now I want everybody to know who St. Damien is.
Well, let's go to Kalaupapa. You need to go.
Let's go. Yeah, Donovan, I've never
Donovan,
been
you need to
either,
go.
so we need to schedule a trip. Okay.
Well, the producer of this show has access to getting you there. So.
And the producer of the show is telling us to wrap up. So, Dallas, we're going to continue this conversation next week. So if you are enjoying this conversation, we're going to talk a little bit more about how, what life is like in Hawaii as a Catholic, and how St. Damien really just kind of like set the tone for us all, really. So, Dallas, can you wrap us up in a prayer in your native language, and then we will continue this conversation next week.
Sure. I ka inoa kamakua me keiki au me ka uhane hemolele. E kia manawa mamake nui wau e nanoi ia Seneca Kamiano. E puli ia maka ia kamako i kia manawa nanoi mako ia oe e ho'opamaka ia mako a e kako ia mako a e imi nā mea mai kai. E kia kua mahalo ia oe no ki ia la kui ka wā, mahalo ia oe no ki ia hoike, ho'opamaka ia mako a e kako ia mako I ka la me ke ia la. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We ask St. Damien, first of all, to pray for us, to help us on our path each and every day. Help us to seek virtue. Help us to seek the good things that we need to be on the path to heaven. And Father in heaven, we thank you for this special occasion, for this podcast. And we ask that you bless us in this and all things through Christ our Lord. Amen.